Welcome to ENYTING Gender podcast, shaping an equitable future. I am Sharmin Prince, your guide through the nuanced world of gender relations. Join me as we explore critical topics with esteemed experts. Our mission is clear: dispel the myths, understand cultural and societal norms, and shine a light on gender-based violence, GBV, all through a lens of education and empowerment. Our promise to you is to educate about the foundations of inequality, to inform on the wide-reaching impacts of gender-based violence, and to empower you, our listeners, with the tools to make a difference. Embark with us on a journey of knowledge and transformation. Stand with us as we strive for a world where equity is not a privilege, but a right.
Okay. Hello, welcome to the ENYTING Gender podcast. I am your host, Sharmin Prince, and I'm thrilled to greet you at Space, a forum dedicated to exploring and unraveling the complexities of gender in our modern world. Today, we embark on yet another enlightening journey, weaving through the rich tapestry of gender narratives, examining the cross-stitch of cultural norms, and challenging the seams that have long defined and confined gender roles. Whether you're here to find community, to learn something new, or to be a part of the change, we welcome you with open arms and a commitment to a respectful, honest exchange of ideas. Today, we have a guest, Dana Theus, and she is an executive and career coach specializing in helping you unlock your highest potential to succeed and to shine. With her support, women aspiring to greater levels of leadership and entrepreneurship learn to retell the stories they must heal so that they can emerge into their full potential and find their authenticity, confident voice. Leveraging a 25-plus year career on the front lines of business, Dana has worked for Fortune 50 companies, entrepreneurial tech startups, government and military agencies, and nonprofits. And she has taught graduate level courses for several universities in the Washington, D.C. area. She writes on multiple leadership sites to bring an empowered voice to leadership development. Welcome, Dana. And
Thank you.
I'm sorry, is there anything that you'd like to add to that wonderful bio?
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. I've enjoyed getting ready for this conversation, and I was inspired just listening to you introduce it again. So thank you for doing this work. It's so, these topics are just so interesting and so important.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And my first question to you, when you hear all this chatter and noise about gender equity and gender equality, what comes to mind?
Wow, what a great question. Well, now, in the world that I live in now, in the career that I have now, after decades of asking myself that question. What I think of now is history. You know, the history of our species has been a struggle for power and equality and equity among human beings. And in that history, there's always been the binary of gender, the way we've defined it culturally, which we're now recognizing is less a binary than we ever really thought it was. But through history, as we struggle for power and create the trauma that has given birth to the most wonderful stories on the planet and the most dramatic music and all the things we enjoy in our entertainment, that struggle for power has fundamentally kind of come down to gender in a lot of ways. And it shows the human proclivity for putting things in polar opposites. And they say women and men are polar opposites. You know, we've treated it that way. So when we talk about equality and we talk about equity, we tend to look at it and through that polar disparity. And I just see it as one big story of humanity that brings us to a place where we can actually begin to see the inequity that we started creating, you know, literally probably millions of, you know, tens of thousands, if not millions and millions of years ago. And so my curiosity is always there, like, okay, what are we discovering today? If we look back at what we thought gender equity and equality, we didn't even have the word equity. We thought gender equality was 50 years ago or 100 years ago with trying to get women the right to vote, or before that. Our understanding of what equal means, our understanding of what equity means continues to change as we learn more about gender and about what constitutes fair treatment and fair opportunity. So that's an abstract answer that, you know, when I'm working with a specific client, I might bring it down to a particular view of their situation. But overall, having worked with so many clients, having studied this topic, I just see it as an evolution of our understanding of what all those things mean: gender, equity, and equality, because they're constantly evolving.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. In your years of research and studying women, gender, equity, and equality, what are some of the, I want to say, salient points that you have discovered that the average person may not be exposed to?
I would say the most core learning that I've had and continue to have, and this applies to everybody, men, women, and people who define themselves at neither end of that spectrum, it's a human truth, is that we want and need external power in the world. You know, external power, money, the ability to make decisions about our lives and the lives of the people we care for, and the resources to live through those decisions. We want to live in a better house. We want to go on better vacations. We want to eat better food, whatever. We want better education, whatever. We need power in the world to do that. So we need a certain amount of external power. Our media and our culture tells us we need even more. We need to be at the top. We need to be the most powerful person, or at least more powerful than everybody else we know. And so this constant pursuit of external power, which in our careers often looks like getting a promotion or, you know, getting a title or whatever, more money, that pursuit of external power is usually dependent on our connection to our internal power. And when I think about internal power, what I focus on in my practice with people is how we make use of our internal resources, our time, our attention, our intention, and our energy. Do we spend our energy worrying all the time, or do we spend our energy making things happen? That choice is an internal resource. And the people who tend to achieve external power and maintain it and find satisfaction in it those people tend to have a decent relationship with their internal power. They control their energy. They control their time. They control their intention and their attention. But what I've noticed, particularly bringing it back to the gender dimension, is that women are often, and I think it's because the story of that gender story through time I talked about, between men and women, the relationship women have had historically with external power is fundamentally broken. Our external power has been taken away from us, because we were property, because we were owned, because we didn't have the right to have a bank account. My mother didn't have a right to have a bank account, made her divorce really hard for her. So this relationship with external power has been legally broken for so many women, and it still is in a lot of places in the world, as you know. So because the external power has been taken away from us, a lot of us have a broken relationship with our internal power. We believe since we can't have external power, we can't control our internal resources of time, attention, intention, our energy. It's not ours to control. Our job is to give of ourselves so much that we come last, right? And what I've learned, you ask, what have I learned? And I saw it in my own life, and I've seen it in every one of my clients, men and women, by the way. When we get in touch with and start to own an authentic relationship with our inner power, even if it's still a little broken, we were all a little broken. But when we start to connect with our inner power, external power becomes accessible to us. We can imagine having it. We can actually want it. We can take actions more effectively to get it. And when we are being treated unfairly, unequally, and equitably, we have the inner strength to walk away and create boundaries. And quite often, the people who've been withholding power from us externally decide to give it to us if we're really good at what we do. And so it seems antithetical that to get external power, you need to get in touch with your internal power. But it's absolutely true. And it's absolutely true for everyone that I've ever worked with of either gender. But for the reasons I mentioned, men tend to have a little more accessibility to their internal power. They give themselves permission to have internal power in a way that a lot of women don't, or feel guilty about, or, withhold from themselves. And so my work with them, that's why I call my company Empower Coaching, is it's all about seeking whatever you're looking for in the world when it comes to power, which may just be the power to have a control over your life and your career in a way that brings you joy and meaning, is to get in touch with whatever aspect of your internal power you're withholding from yourself as the first step to that external success.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that thorough response. And you answered my next question partially, but I am going to ask you for details. How can women restore their internal power? How can we restore that internal power? And maybe just give us a few steps, the first 2 steps that we can take to ensure there is restoration.
Wow, what an important question. Let me see if I can come up with something simple, because it's, as you know, it's complicated. I loved, by the way, your analogy in the opening about the tapestry, the tapestry of gender.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, this is an internal tapestry. We're always weaving our internal self. We're creating our internal self. We're remaking our internal self each time we retell our narrative. And we need to keep retelling our narrative to keep remaking ourselves. But to your question, how can we restore our relationship with that internal power? I think that it's different for different people because that break is different. However, one thing that is common is simply the ability to get into dialogue with your inner voice. Our external world, all our notifications on our phones and everything around us is trying to distract us from our internal voice. And yet our internal voice holds the clues. And when I say the clues, I mean that, our internal dialogue, we often hear about that little gremlin on our shoulder, the inner critic that's trying to tear us down. And that's a very real dynamic for men and for women. For women, it's very debilitating a lot of times because the men also have an inner voice of confidence more often, not always, but more often than women do. And you can't retell a story you don't know. So if you can't hear what your inner critic or your inner voice is saying, you can't understand it in the way you might want to change it, the way you might be able to change it authentically. And what I mean by that is we cannot believe something we don't believe. And we can't not believe anything. We have to believe something. So we can't retell a story. We can't revise a story that we don't understand. So first we have to hear it and understand it, which is often painful. And then we get into dialogue with it, and then we begin to change it. Then we begin to retell it. So this takes many forms: mindfulness, going on yoga retreats, journaling to yourself, taking time alone in the woods sometimes. There's so many ways to access it that there's no simple truth, and it's different for each of us. But what I will say is many people find accessing that voice, that internal voice, very frightening, because that internal voice has been ignored and pushed away and pushed down for so long that when it gets a chance to talk, it's just kind of spewing. And a lot of people think it's their authentic self spewing. It's not. It's just a voice in you trying to tell you things it wants you to know. But when you're able to get into dialogue with it, and this is why journaling is also often a very useful tool for a variety of reasons, when you get into dialogue with it, it starts telling you things, and then you ask it why it thinks that, and it starts telling you that too. And pretty soon you're on this really interesting journey to understand why you are who you are and how you came to be that way. And especially with the guidance of a coach or a therapist or just a very good friend who's very understanding, when you begin to verbalize this for yourself, you begin to have access to that inner break, but also the inner sources of power that are just sitting there waiting for you to access them but you've never looked. So the short answer that I just gave long is that it's getting into dialogue with your inner self. And for some of us, this is easier than others. And for some of us, it's almost a physical thing. And others, it's a much more emotional and intellectual thing. It's different for everybody. But getting into a relationship with yourself is the first step.
Thank you. If more of us develop that relationship with ourselves, would we be better equipped to manage the gender stereotypes, the gender biases, the gender discriminations that we face on a daily basis?
That's a leading question, so I'll say yes. And I can give you some examples. And I'll just be upfront with my approach to stereotype, gender or otherwise. But, I and a lot of my clients face stereotypes. We face double standards. We discover them at different points in time, right? In different ways. And the moment you discover that you are the quote victim of a stereotype, it's a very disempowering feeling, isn't it? Because particularly if that stereotype has to do with things you don't control, the color of your skin, the gender you present as, unless you've made an effort to present as a different gender, the age that you are, even though you're trying not to be old, I can tell you from personal experience, after a while, some of those efforts just don't pay off, right? You are the age you are. And so the moment you find out you're a victim of ageism or racism or sexism in any of their forms, the more benign or the more criminal, in that moment, you're kind of like, oh my God, what can I do? I can't do anything. I'm powerless to fight this. That's kind of a normal reaction. And yet there's always ways to address it that are more empowering. But to find those, you have to look at yourself and say, what would be empowering to me? Because just because something is empowering to somebody else doesn't mean it's empowering to me. I'll give you an example. When I was mid-career, I hit what I thought was a glass ceiling. You know, I was kind of at a senior management level, and I wanted to go for a VP job, a vice president's job, and I didn't get it. And I looked at all the people who were operating at that senior level in the company, and I just realized I'm like, I don't think I want to be there anyway. Like I think I could figure out how to get there and be successful there, but I don't think I'd like who I would have to become to be there, because those people are sharks. They're eating each other alive every staff meeting. You know, they're being unpleasant. They're backstabbing each other. I'm like, I don't want to be that person. So at that point in my career, the empowering thing I did for myself was to quit. I became a consultant. I went out on my own. I said, screw this corporate thing. I am going to take ownership of my career. I'm not going to let them make me into someone I don't want to be. I'm out. And it was actually a very empowering move for me. I discovered that I was more valuable on the market than I thought I was. I got hired back by the same company as a contractor for, like, you know, 3/4 of the salary and half the hours. You know, my my lifestyle got better. It was really empowering. And yet I talk to a lot of my clients these days who think they're hitting a glass ceiling. And my advice to them is very different, because I realize now things I didn't know then, including the fact that the glass ceiling, the story we tell ourselves is it's a sexist plot, right? That all the men and the women who act like men at the top are just trying to keep the women out. That's what, or Black people out, or people who are not like them out, right? It's like we want to see it as an exclusion due to bias. And I absolutely believe there's bias there. You know, there is such a thing as the club at the top. However, having now progressed in my career and helped a lot of other people progress in their career, I also see that the glass ceiling screens out people of all kinds who don't understand the way you have to work at the most senior levels. It's not about doing things. It's about making decisions. It's not about producing things. It's about taking risk intelligently, right? Understanding the complexity of the organization and the strategic requirements on it, and be able to get out of the weeds and look at that higher level, look out into the market, look at the customers and, you know, all the different stakeholders, and decide what's the path forward for our organization. And then to sort of fight the battles with your peers and with everybody else to get those things done. And it's hard work. And so the glass ceiling to me today means something different than it did then. And I think, to your question, for a lot of my clients, you know, for me, hitting the glass ceiling I hit, or as I perceived it, was to quit. And for a lot of my clients, that's sometimes true, but sometimes the most empowering thing they can do is challenge themselves to get out of the weeds, to learn new skills, to learn to be strategic, to learn to think outside the box, to learn to care about the customers and the investors and the market as a whole, and expand their view and have a bigger vision. That turns out to be the most empowering thing they can do. And so, you know, there's just a different answer for everybody. And the question comes down to, what is it that you perceive is your fear in any particular point in time? And what is the thing you can do most proactively and most authentically that you want to do? When I got out of it, when I quit, I wanted to be a better mother to my children because they were small, and I felt like I was being taken advantage of, but I also wanted to work. and I wanted to make a difference in organizations. So as a contractor, I found a way to do both. I have clients today who also are mothers and want to be better mothers, and they tell themselves a different story. They say, you know what, I can be effective at the top. I can be in the treetops. I can take control of my schedule and be able to be there for my children. And I can learn to communicate with investors in such a way they want to give my company money. And then they go do that. and they start operating above the glass ceiling. Neither one of those strategies, mine or my clients I just described, is wrong or better. It's just the right one at the right time for what we want in our lives and what's important to us and what our values are and what our choices are that we're facing. And each of us will come up against other choices in the future that give us options. So as long as we're making that choice and it's aligned with who we are and what we want for ourselves and our lives, it's empowering. It's less about what you do and more about how and why you do it. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure. I wandered a bit.
Sure, it's fine. You did. Someone asked me a question, and I am going to pose that question to you. She said to me, as a woman who is not in touch with her inner power or don't have that relationship, her question is, how do I function effectively in a male-dominated work environment? And I told her after this episode, I'll answer her. So, help me.
So what is it that told you she was not in touch with her inner power?
She has identified that she has a broken relationship with herself.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what tends to come up with the women I know who express something similar, which is going back to stories and narratives, and the stories and narratives of that tend to be gendered. There's a lot of things that are gendered in our world. Our stereotypes about leadership, for example. But when you're at that fundamental level, so what you describe as her situation, that's a fundamental question, and it really comes down to power and our relationship with power. And men are often, little boys are often instilled with a narrative that says you're powerful and you can be anything you want. And when you get down, fall down, skin your knees, get up and do it again, eventually you'll succeed. And little girls often hear a different message, although that's changing, thank goodness. But even today, in the social messages we get, the cultural messages we get, the media messages we get messages that we're powerful if blank. You're powerful if you're liked, if you're approved of, if others, especially men, want you. So women often get this message that their power derives from external sources, but that gives the external sources power over them. And it leads to behaviors like needing to be so perfect that you overwork yourself and you work twice as hard as everybody around you, and you don't ask for credit because asking for credit is not seen as polite. You wait for permission. You don't have a vision for yourself. You just execute everybody else's vision. These are all behaviors that go along with not feeling like you're giving yourself permission to just be powerful because of who you are. And so in a male-dominated environment, like the woman you're talking about, these stories about power are on steroids because the male-dominated culture is saying men are powerful just because they exist in a male body, right? And the antithesis of that is that, well, women either aren't powerful or have to prove their power or have to earn their power by being liked, approved of, et cetera, or working 10 times as hard. not twice as hard. If you want power, you got to work 10 times as hard. So the first thing to do is to identify for someone like that, what are the behaviors that she most exhibits that feed into that narrative? Is she a perfectionist? Is she working twice as hard? Is she waiting for permission? Is she not having her own career goals because she's just hoping that her boss will tell her what her career goals should be? And, some women wait for all those things and some women don't. But there's usually some behavioral expression of this inner narrative that says, I'm only powerful if blank. And when you can put together the narrative that disempowers you with the behavior that disempowers you, you can start to explore changing the narrative and the behavior together. And pretty soon you can knit together something that feels powerful, authentically powerful. And here's the key to it. Take a belief that's disempowering. I'm not educated enough. I don't have enough degrees. That may be true. You may be surrounded by people who have a lot of degrees. And in some ways, it's true that you're not as educated as they are. But there's another truth sitting next to that. In my case, when I ran up against the education thing and thought I needed to go get another degree, I found a truth which was, but I am experienced enough. I have been around a block or two. I know some things. So it may be true that I'm not as educated as I could be, but it's also true that I'm experienced enough for all the work that I do. And there's that Native American parable, which I'm going to botch because I don't remember the exact, we're walking with two wolves, one that tears us up and the other that protects us. And the one that wins is the one we feed. So when we lean into not being educated enough or not being blank enough, we just feed what tears us apart. But when we say that's true, and I choose to pay attention to give my energy, to give my attention to that wolf that protects me, that I am experienced enough, that I'm smart enough, that I'm intuitive enough, that I'm dedicated enough, whatever you fill that blank with, you lean into that. Now you've got an authentic connection to something that matters to you, that is meaningful to you, and that feeds you. And if you just take a little time every day and actually let yourself be in that energy, let yourself have it. People give you a compliment, don't push it away, actually accept it and see what it feels like to believe maybe that could be true. The more you just spend time feeling those things, the more accessible it becomes. And pretty soon, it doesn't matter whether you're in a male-dominated environment or not, you actually have a connection to that power that's within you. Now, sometimes you get to that point and you're like, I don't want to be in a male-dominated environment anymore. I'm leaving. But often it just gives you a buffer against some of the double standards that you're probably up against. And we can talk about those because there's a lot of them. It can give you an internal strength to sort of be thoughtful about it instead of being angry or reactionary or just running and hiding under a hole every time you run into a double standard that doesn't help you. And you need that inner strength. And you also need friends you can vent to, of course, because injustice is fundamentally angering and we need a place to deal with that. But just looking for the positive truths that sit next to the negative truths about who you are and deciding that those are valid and putting your attention and energy into it can give you enough of a perspective about your own power that you can see a male-dominated environment or any other kind of toxic environment that doesn't support you and help you make better choices.
Thank you. I would like us to talk about the double standards, but when you mention seeking permission from the boss to tell her about her career goals, two personal incidents just resurfaced for me. I remembered when I was planning to go to the University of Guyana, I wanted to pursue economics, but my mentor and pastor guided me into social work. When I came to the US, I am working in the nonprofit. My goal is to become a social worker. And my male supervisor and mentor at that time said to me, "You have such great administrative skills. Why pursue social work?" And Dana, would you believe that I veered off my path? So when you mentioned that, those two incidents popped into my mind, and I'm like, wow, this is so real, and I'm sure this is real for a lot of women because of the way we were socialized and the way men were revered in our lives, and the absence of male figures also in our lives who have been you know, persons like me from a single parent home. So you caused me to really I'll have to process that so that it doesn't happen a third time, hopefully.
Let me digress even further because there's a dynamic here that I am very curious about, and I am trying to understand. And I'll give you the understanding I have today, but honestly, I think there's so many dimensions to this that you and I, a lot of other people, will be excavating it for a long time. And it comes to me around the idea of vision, having a vision for yourself or for the world. That is something, the vision thing. Our business literature is full of the need for companies to have visions, for great leaders to have visions. And in fact, I've come to understand through the leadership lens as an executive coach working with leaders, I've come to understand that the vision thing is very real from the standpoint that, going back to that glass ceiling, the people on the top, and I'm going to bring it back to career in a minute, but the people at the top have to have a vision of how they want the organization, the world, the market to be different than it is today in a way that their organization can thrive. And that's their work, which is to have a vision of how things can be better and to have an understanding of all the ways that things aren't better today and have a plan to get us from here to there. And the fiction is that anybody can see the future, that anybody could have a plan that won't get screwed up. The work is in having a vision and a plan and then dealing with the messy reality of trying to stay aligned with it enough to achieve some of the vision. But this requires us to go into the unknown, to have confidence in ourselves, to take risks on behalf of other people, all the employees that work for us. There's a lot of anxiety that can come with this. There's a lot that can go wrong. And you have to believe in the vision, be willing to say you're wrong sometimes and veer. And it's an art form. It's a skill. It's a leadership skill. And again, men have held those positions doing those things. So we know what it looks like for men to have visions about the company, about the world, and to take bold action and take risks to achieve it. Well, not very many women up there, and the women who do tend to get there are often really good doers. They're really good administrators. They're really good at making things happen. And it's interesting to me when I meet with women, either on the leadership track or just in their career, like you articulated, you're trying to decide what to do with what degree to get, or what to do with your degree, or what to do with your career, especially when you want to have a family or, you have other personal responsibilities. It can become very challenging. I always ask them, well, what is your vision for success in life or in your career or at just the next step? If you're a manager, do you want to be a senior manager? If you're vice president, do you want to be CEO? And it's fascinating to me that the men always have an answer. And the women maybe half the time have an answer. And when I probe, a lot of the time, the women who don't have an answer, their answer is, well, I've always just defined my success by who do I help? Am I helping my children, my husband, my customers? It's always about who I help. So coming back to that permission to have your own internal vision, which vision is an internal power, a goals are internal powers. And if you take it all the way back to childhood, and if you and I had more time, I'd be curious about your childhood experiences. But I think that boys and men are just asked that question more often. What's your vision? What do you want? Forget vision. What do you want? I actually don't remember getting that question asked of me very much when I was a child. What I wanted wasn't nearly as important as what other people wanted for me. And it sounds like you have a similar experience, perhaps. And so when nobody asks you what you want, and then nobody treats the answer to your questions, to that question seriously, you kind of develop a story in your head that it's not for you to want. It's for you to serve. And many of us do get a lot of joy out of serving. There's nothing wrong with serving. But a lot of the times our service is most meaningful when it's because it's in service of our vision of a better world for ourselves and other people. And that's where the power of service really comes from. But we don't ask ourselves that often enough. We don't ask each other that often enough. And we don't treat our answers with enough seriousness. And there's always somebody else whose vision is more important. And so we don't develop the habit. And I think there's also a lot of time women get to a point in their career where to get above the glass ceiling, to operate at a higher leadership level, they really do need to be able to have a vision, articulate a vision, defend a vision, take the risk, do the risk analysis for a vision. And it feels so scary and so unfamiliar, they don't do it. And then they are frustrated that they can't have the leadership authority that they want. So this whole vision thing, I think, is really, really important and underappreciated when it comes to just the leadership gap we see between the genders. And your experience is a perfect example.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's touch on the double standards, because that's very important. And I know you have a lot to share with us, and I hope that you can do it
Briefly. Well, let me just say this. So I am just about to publish an article that is my attempt to log all the double standards I found again about women in the workplace in one place, because the double standard that I heard about most often and most women that I talk to are very familiar with is the double standard that men can be aggressive but women can't be. And male leaders are supposed to be aggressive, but when a woman as a part of her leadership style is perceived as aggressive, then she's the B word, right? And that is true. There's plenty of research that says that's true. But what's interesting is it's not quite that simple. And the simple version of it is that men are expected to be, the word is agentic, meaning have agency. So male leaders need to have agency. They need to be independent. They need to have vision. They need to be able to make decisions and drive towards actions and say no and say, this is what we're going to do, point at the hill and go. And when they do that, they're respected as leaders. That's the stereotype. And that's the generic leadership stereotype. Women are expected first and foremost to be communal, to be social, to be collaborative, to be supportive. But that's outside the leadership stereotype. That's the woman stereotype. Women leaders need to be communal and agentic, but they cannot be agentic in a way that makes them appear non-communal. So the successful women leaders are both, and yet they find a way to be agentic in a way that's still communal. When this is a very hard thing to do. This is difficult territory to navigate. But there's plenty of women leaders who do it, and they do it by being authentic. The catch is men get a pass on being communal. They don't need to be communal to be perceived as good leaders. And matter of fact, if they're too communal, then they're kind of perceived as weak leaders. And so that's a perfect example of the double standard that women face. But there's been a lot of research in the last 10 or 15 years that show that's just the tip of the iceberg. So there's double standards around taking credit. Men are expected to take credit for their achievements. Women are expected to give credit to their teams. And if they only take credit and don't give credit, men can get away with that. Women cannot. There's a recent study we found where in scientific and engineering professions, women who publicly communicate about their work are perceived as, bragging, and they're trying to self-aggrandize so the appreciation for their accomplishments is diminished, versus men who can just declare that they're God's gift to everything and everybody believes it, right? So women who want to get recognition for their work have to figure out how to do it in a way they won't be perceived as bragging. And again, this comes back to, well, maybe I won't go present that paper, or maybe I'll take a panel instead of a keynote. And so their profiles aren't raised as much. There are a ton of age-related double standards. Young women are supposed to be sexy, but not too sexy. Old women are supposed to be young looking, but not young acting. Gray hair on a woman is a sign she's over the hill. Gray hair on a man means he's coming into his prime and we can trust him, right? There's no end of it. And unfortunately, in addition to just being difficult to navigate, sometimes it just has a true cost. Motherhood gets penalized financially. Women's salaries go down when they have children. Men's salaries go up because now they're perceived as the breadwinner and they have to, take home the bacon, even if their wife is making more money. So there's just no end of these double standards. We're going to catalog as many of them as we can find. And I'll send you the link if you want to include it in the show notes. But, the thing that finally did it for me to understand this was that, that quote, Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in high heels, right? Is that, when I heard that quote, I was like, I never thought of it that way. I never even saw Ginger Rogers. How awful is that? That beautiful, lovely, accomplished woman that could dance backwards in heels and keep up with Fred Astaire and actually outshine him a lot of the time was invisible to me, because I was following the cultural narrative that the male, especially a male who was graceful, was the bee's knees, the thing to be amazed at. And I think that's the challenge of the double standard, is we have to see it, but to see it, we have to get outside the cultural lens that says, of course, the men are the breadwinners. And men aren't the breadwinners nearly as often as they used to be. And even if they are, women's salaries now matter. We need a double income in a lot of cases to achieve the lifestyle that is comfortable in our world. And so getting outside the double standard means seeing it. And then it means helping other people see it and come up with vocabulary that helps other people see it without succumbing to defensive anger. And that's a trick, because of course you see the double standard, you're angry. You have a right to be angry. But anger by itself, especially reactive anger, can backfire. So you have to get past your anger, and then you have to be able to articulate, well, what is the alternative? And that is hard. So for Ginger Rogers, the alternative was she was dancing backwards and in high heels, and that's amazing. Let's see Fred Astaire dance. Just imagine Fred Astaire dancing backwards in heels, and you understand what a feat she performed. But in the case of the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood bonus, what is the alternative to that? Well, it could be, the woman who just took on motherhood now has a management challenge in her daily life that no one else can appreciate if they've never been a parent. and a primary parent. And what skills does that give her in the workplace? One of the best stories that I've heard recently was Christine Lagarde, who I think she runs the IMF now, and for a long time she was running like the European Central Bank. In one of those two organizations, she actually had an HR policy, a hiring policy changed, that if a woman was out of the workforce for like 2 to 4 years because of motherhood, she was given credit for management skills because Christine Lagarde was a mother and she knew what it took to manage your home and your household and your children. And she said, you know what, those mothers, they've got skills we need. Let's value them. Let's put true value on them in the hiring process. Now, I'm assuming she made sure there was pay equity there too. But if our hiring practices shifted so that motherhood became reason to give people credit for their management abilities, I think that the motherhood bonus might change a little bit. And those are the kind of ways that to take a double standard and to retell that story in a way that shows how valuable the things that that standard has been undervaluing are to our organizations and our businesses, at least it gets a conversation going that needs to be had. And in the best cases, it retells a narrative. But we've just got to tackle those things one at a time when we find them.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your response. Thank you for your time here. And in closing, would you like to leave anything with our listener? Any additional information, thought?
I guess what I would just say is that we are all subject to stereotype, men and women at every age. Some of those stereotypes actually help us, and some of them don't. But to know, and some of them are gendered and some of them aren't, like age, which is gendered, but it's also a function of age. And the trick is to center on yourself and your power and what's important to you and what you want. Going back to that vision, what's your vision for your life in the next period of time? And look at the stereotypes, look at the double standards, look at the unfairnesses through the lens of what you want, what you value, what's important to you, and what you need. And when you do that, and you own those things, what you want, what you need, who you are, and what you value, when you own it, you say, this is where I'm coming from, some of those double standards, some of those stereotypes will just be less important, and others will be more important. And that gives you focus. That gives you your path forward to figure out, well, how do I get what I want and what I need and what I value, navigating the reality of my world that's going to either prevent me from getting there or give me the path beyond it. And then you've got an action plan. And so go and start inside and move out.
Well, Dana, thank you so much. I believe that we were able to unpick some of the old threads and weave some new patterns together on this episode of the ENYTING Gender podcast. And I want to thank you for your contribution. And may all that you do be successful. And I hope you can brace us with your presence once again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting this dialogue, not just for me, but for all our listeners and everybody who will touch this in the future. It's very important.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. This is Sharmin Prince, reminding you that change starts with awareness. Share your key takeaways from this episode and engage in the conversation by tagging us on social media. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review if you're committed to shaping an equitable future. Together, we are stronger. Until next time, be the change you wish to see. Goodbye now from the ENYTING Gender podcast.